Hello, everyone. Great to see you all. We're going to wait a couple more minutes as everyone still is signing on here. But we are already live on YouTube, I believe. So we'll just hang on a little while longer. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. This is Councilwoman Rebecca Villagran, one of your tri-chairs for our Alamo Citizens Advisory Commission, and using the words of our facilitator, Francisco Gonima Rea, are we at a critical mass right now?
Yes, ma'am, we are. We'll have a few more join, but we have almost everyone.
All right, wonderful. Well, welcome, everyone. So glad to have you all here again. I do appreciate the frequency that we're getting to see each other here as part of the Alamo Citizens Advisory Committee. Of course, we're here with our tri-chairs, Sue Ann Pemberton, and with Ms. Aranetta Pierce, our tri-chairs, and so thank you all very much for your participation. There are a couple of people that I would like to also acknowledge on the call today. First is Andy Segovia, the city attorney, the San Antonio city attorney, and member of the management committee now for the city of San Antonio. And then, of course, Lori's on here. I'll get to her in a little while. But I believe that we are also going to have Kate Rogers, the executive director of the Alamo Trust. She is on here as well. And of course, Lori, who will continue to serve as the city's staff lead for this whole Alamo project. Now tonight, to our ACAC members, tonight will be the first opportunity for the public to also see the specific concepts that we've been looking over for a while now. And if you all can think back, our reset started at the beginning of this month of March. And since March 8th, we have had 2 official ACAC meetings. We've had 3 listening circles with our ACAC members. We have project coordination meetings with the executive committee and the management committee. Well, and then we have 2 more ACAC meetings this week, and that doesn't even include some of the meetings you all had for just other listening sessions that you all have. So I would like to thank you all because we have accomplished a great deal, and we have re-engaged, and I do appreciate all of your input, conversation, and everything that you all put in thus far to this. And we're still not there yet, of course. We know that there's still a lot to go. I did want to open it just quickly to give a few welcome remarks from our other tri-chair members, and then I will pass it over. Sue Ann?
Welcome once again to revisiting this project and seeing how we can all work together, come together, and make the project come together and make it a great project for San Antonio and the rest of the world. Thank you for your participation, and we'll see where we go.
Ms. Araneta, Ms. Araneta, we can't hear you right now.
Ms. Arnetta?
It's not unmuted.
One more time. Try to unmute yourself one more time. Okay, all right. Thank you, Araneta. I'm sorry, we'll get that fixed. I don't know if somebody else was muting you at the same time, but we'll just go ahead, and I was going to...
She's there.
Araneta? Oh.
You had it, and then you ended it. There.
I think I have it again. I just want to join you. Can't keep it down. I just want to add my voice to the other tri-chairs, saying that we are sincerely appreciative to you, all the members of the committee, for your commitment, intensity, attention, and ideas as we've been meeting overtime for the last 2, well, actually, as I think as Councilwoman said, for the last month. And we appreciate your diligence as we look at the interpretive ideas, and you're sharing your ideas. It means a great deal. And I think we're getting there. So I appreciate all of you, and let's move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I think, Francisco, am I supposed to pass it to you so you can continue to engage us the way you so wonderfully do?
Briefly, and then we'll turn it over to the team. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you tonight, as well as members of the San Antonio public that are joining us. We're super excited to share the incredibly hard work that's been going on with all of you. What we're going to do tonight is, in a little bit, we're going to hear from the city staff and the design team on everything that's gone on in the last couple of months to catch the public up on all the work that's happened to really bring the Alamo plan back into kind of full possibility and the present day. Then we're going to hear from the members of the Alamo Citizens Advisory Committee. We're going to do a bit of a roll call and ask everyone to weigh in on the reimagining of the elements that's going to be presented this evening. Very much what you all got to preview last week. and give you an opportunity. Each ACAC member will have about a minute to weigh in and kind of offer their thoughts to the public on whether they think it really meets the criteria of the vision and guiding principles and the 5 key components of the Alamo plan. And then we're going to open it up to public comment. And we've got an online platform that we have available for members of the public to send questions in that might be addressed by the design team, as well as any comments they have on what's being presented tonight. And then we, as the ACAC, will take a little bit of time to dialogue on what we heard from the public. So that's our show for the evening. That's what we've got in store for you. And so I will turn it over to Lori to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Francisco, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen and do a brief update on where we've been and kind of talk about our schedule and next steps. There we go. So just as a reminder, we are the Citizens Advisory Committee. We are a 26-member committee plus 4 technical advisory committee members. And the role of the committee is to provide feedback in an advisory capacity to the management committee on the development of the Alamo plan. And that includes the physical plan, the interpretive plan, and the design. And we want to make sure that's in keeping with the vision and guiding principles. We are completely full with the exception of 1 vacancy, and that's in District 7. Now, as a reminder, at the last meeting we talked about an issue related to archaeology. In the listening circles that the tri-chairs had, there was a lot of concerns expressed and frustration over how the city and the trust and the general land office treated the archaeology on the site. And so what the city has worked out with several stakeholders, and I want to thank Ramon Vasquez, is that we will be initiating an archival investigation of the city-owned property on the Campo Santo footprint. And so this is the property that the city owns, and the scope of work will include a synthesis of all previous archaeological reports and other documentation that encountered human remains. So other documentation could include deed records, could include newspaper articles, and we will look at this synthesis, and then we will come back and see, where are the gaps and where do we need to do more research. Now, to help us with this archival investigation, we've created a committee. That committee will include our city archaeologists and our consultants. And then we're inviting the 3 members of the Citizens Advisory Committee that were appointed by the mayor to represent archaeology and history. And that includes Ramon Vasquez, Carrie Lattimore, and Dr. Sharon Skribarsik. And I want to thank those 3 committee members for agreeing to serve on this committee. We also will create a plan of action once the archival investigation is complete. And that plan of action will establish a process for communication, treatment, custody, and other items in the event of a discovery on city-owned property. And then finally, we will create an archaeology advisory committee that includes representatives from the 16 local tribes that we have here in San Antonio, the local organizations, plus the 6 members of the Alamo Mission Archaeology Committee created by the Alamo Trust. And that advisory committee will provide feedback on the plan of action, and they will also provide us other guidance should other features be encountered during our investigations. As the councilwoman mentioned, we've had a lot of meetings over the past 30 days, and your work has not ended. And so we really divided the next 10 months into 3 tasks. Task 1 is for the Citizens Advisory Committee to provide feedback to the Management Committee on our design assumptions that will be used as we go into the design of the plaza. Specifically, whether or not these new assumptions we're recommending allow for the 5 key concepts to be realized. So we're doing that work right now. So that'll take place over March and April. Now, once we are done with that work, and I'll go into the immediate next steps on the next slide, but once we're done with that work, then we're going to spend June, July, May, June, July on doing an overview of the interpretive plan and content development. So we will have presentations on the interpretive plan, and then we'll break that up into the different themes that you saw within the vision and guiding principles. And we'll also focus on the mission era, the battle era and Texas Revolution, and then the post-battle era. We'll bring in experts. Several of you have already made some recommendations on what experts you'd like to be there for a panel discussion. But this will be a way for everyone to get reintroduced to the interpretive plan and provide feedback on the interpretive plan. We also want to hear from the local organizations that the local organizations regarding the importance of their specific events and traditions that occur in the plaza. So we'd like to bring in the Battle of the Flowers organization to talk about how the parade has relevance to the Alamo. The same with the Cavaliers, the same with the Top Alum, all those organizations that will continue to do ceremonies on the site. We want to take an inventory of those events and why they are important to the site. And then at the end of this task, we will have our committee come back and do a report on the archival investigation. And then task 3 is actually the design work. And so August through December, we'll be working on the design. We'll bring the design to the Citizens Advisory Committee for feedback, to the Management Committee, and ultimately this will go to HDRC for their review. So immediate next steps. March 29th, that's where we are tonight. We are going to present some of the assumptions, and these assumptions have provided more clarity based on what we heard at last week's work session. March 31st, we will present the final assumptions for your approval. And then we will have a management executive committee meeting shortly after. And then on April 8th, City Council will get a briefing on the proposed assumptions and next steps and the lease agreement. And then on April 15th, City Council will take action on the new proposed design assumptions, and the lease and operating agreement will reflect those new design assumptions. But that'll allow us to move forward to task 2 and task 3. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Francisco.
Lori, I think from here we go to the design team, no?
Okay.
Sure.
I'll send it over to Eric Kramer and John Casson.
Absolutely. I tell you what, I'll do a quick little introduction just as a reminder. So my name is John Casson with PGAV Destinations. Eric Kramer is with Rita Hildebrand, and we have shared with you folks, and now we're sharing with the public also. We were involved in the interpretive plan, and now as we start to reset, I'm going to go through a few intro slides and then hand it over to Eric. But as we've talked about a little bit, when we talk about the word reset, these few first slides are really a reminder of some elements that we want to retain and we want to keep in mind as we start to test additional proposed alternates or revisions and do case studies. First and foremost, the vision and guiding principles. We certainly, especially with this group, we certainly don't need to read every word, but we always start with these slides as a reminder that everything we do, we start to bring back and test them and use these as a litmus test to make sure that we are adhering to these vision and guiding principles that you guys worked so hard on. The next slide starts to get into the other thing that we are charged with is to retain those 5 key elements from the master plan. So as we start to go through and test certain things, our goal is to retain, and you'll see that we believe we have, the efforts and the key elements of restoring the church and long barracks, delineating the historic footprint, recapturing that historic Mission Plaza and creating a sense of reverence and respect, creating a world-class museum and visitor center, and also creating that sense of arrival and connectivity, not only in this site, but also to the other spaces and public spaces throughout San Antonio. So if those are the things that we are retaining, there's a certain list of things here on the next slide that we are new parameters, is what we're calling them, that we are going to study. And we've been asked to see, as we start to consider how these 4 elements might impact and the items to retain. And so when we retain the cenotaph, and when we do not lower the grade, and when we start to study how we preserve plaza accents and also retain traditions such as the parade and start to phase street closures, how are those new parameters? How do they, how can we study the what ifs and case studies so that we can achieve these things, but also retain all those, not only the vision and guiding principles, but also the 5 key parameters. So what we're going to go through now today is what we proposed. And we've gone through a series of case studies and shared them a handful of times. But the presentation material that you'll see here in the following slides go through these 5 elements, and that the cenotaph will be prepared but not moved. The mission footprint, you will see, will be delineated by paving material changes, but not necessarily lowered. The plaza will remain accessible to pedestrians without railings. The parades and other key rituals will be accommodated, you'll see in the slides. And finally, we have a scheme that shows how the streets will be closed as planned with certain allowances, whether they be service vehicles, emergency vehicles, and that there's a phasing where Alamo Street between Houston and Crockett will be closed early by June to allow for programming and traffic modeling. So all those 5 elements we will go through multiple different times, and you'll see them in different ways in the future slides. We're not going to go through them kind of in that order. We've studied them in a different way. So today you're going to see how all those 5 elements, how they can be affected spatially, meaning site and physical definition, from a visitor experience standpoint, and then finally interpretively. So we'll go through each one of those chapters with you, and we'll constantly be referring back to those 5 elements and 5 proposed parameter changes. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Eric, and he's going to start to lead us through the spatial definition and site planning portion of it.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to do is make sure that we put in context where we are. As John said, this is a planning exercise to assess the impacts of these proposed parameters on the functioning and character of the site, but it's not design. There is a huge amount of work to do, as Lori said, going forward. We test these ideas through visualization. So what you'll see is diagrams, but there is much design work to do. So take that with a grain of salt and ask questions as we dig into if we are not being clear entirely on what each of these things that we're showing means. So we start with spatial definition, and in reality, what this is about reconciling the 2 complicated things about this site. One is that there are so many rich layers of history here, and it's within the context of a vibrant, modern urban city. How do we start to tell all of those stories, allow them to be seen, but also quiet things down? Create a moment, a space in which you can see them. We talk about this as a kind of coherence, a kind of a sense that you've arrived at a place. Those are 2 complicated things to reconcile, but we use the tools of scale and proportion, light and shade, material qualities, the sense of arrival. These are the tools that we can deploy as designers to allow you to see and experience those rich layers of history and have a sense of coherence and quiet at the same time. So we want to walk you through a sort of image of how this might play out. So we start with the existing conditions, and you see the streets, the curbs, the planters, the ups and the downs, and how hard it is to really come to an understanding of where the mission was, where the battlefield was. And so the first move we talk about is simplification. Can we take away those planters, those curbs, those street signs, all of the sort of things of the 21st century, as a way to kind of create a blank canvas to retell the stories? And this elevates the understanding of the ground as the place where all of these important things happened. So we then begin to understand them and have space for them. Of course, it has the byproduct of being incredibly beneficial for pedestrian circulation, for anyone who has mobility impairments, and certainly for the way it is interpreted. That clearing of the ground plane then allows space for one of the key concepts, which is delineate the footprint. Today, there are lines on the ground that show you where the footprint is, but you'd never see them because there's so much else going on. This simple move of quieting everything down transforms our ability to see and to teach. The surface of the ground, we think, also has another role to play, which is to define a district, the district of the Alamo itself. Imagine a unifying ground plane, a paving material that reaches all the way down to Commerce Street to greet you as you come up from the Riverwalk, out to La Soya on the west, and to Bonham and Crockett on the east. That then says we've arrived somewhere. We know that this is somewhere distinct from the rest of the city. We think that material itself has stories to tell. We've been mapping the agricultural patterns that developed around the acequia as they moved through the site and around the mission. And that creates a set of patterns that we think can actually be inscribed on the ground in the way we use paving patterns. So wherever you're arriving from, immediately you start to understand that there's kind of layers of history happening on the site. We think certainly in the public plaza to the south of the mission, we should start to break down the scale of that, creating seating areas outside the shops along the south part of Alamo, planting within the main plaza outside the Menger and the River Center to create a sense of intimacy, cooling so that that's a really pleasant place to be. And actually that can start to help direct visitor flow and views into the site, potentially directing people quite strongly to the south gate, which today you don't even understand where it is. And then the next, which is really the strong move, which is to transition and to delineate and recapture the scale of the mission and the battlefield by differentiating the paving from that larger area, marking a threshold strongly with a border, and then moving into a new zone. We are not proposing to lower the grade as we did in the interpretive plan. This has many good benefits. It's much better for accessibility. Ultimately, you'll see how we think it can allow us to retain access for the parades. But it retains the ability to delineate and mark that transition. And we pull that away slightly from the footprint itself so that as you come into that space, you have time to reacclimate and then see it. We know there's been concern that we may need to make changes around the church and the long barrack because of the concern about moisture and its potential damage to the historic walls. The GLO is currently undertaking an analysis of that. They're doing moisture monitoring, which will last a year. At the end of that process, they will have a report and a set of recommendations. If out of that comes the recommendation to reduce the grade right around the building, we think that's absolutely possible without reducing the grade around the rest of the site. So we will come to that next year when we get that recommendation. That beautiful, simple ground plane that's delineated then creates opportunities to highlight the interpretive elements. We have not drawn all of the interpretive elements. There are many more to be uncovered, and the work we will do together over the summer will help clarify which are important. But there will be moments in the mission era that will be marked on the ground. The acequia may be marked on the ground. And then there may be other elements that are three-dimensional, like portions of the mission, potentially the South Gate, and other elements from the battle period. But this quieting down and simplification begins to make those more powerful, more visible to anybody who is arriving and visiting on the site. The other sense of arrival we think is really strongly articulated through the trees, the canopy. Imagine that whether you're coming down Crockett Street or up from Commerce, that you're passing through a strong alley or promenade framed by trees. This creates the sense of procession, a kind of importance, a kind of recognition that you are coming towards something. So we're stretching those out to meet all of the edges. Then as you get closer, imagine that the character of those trees changes to groves, probably like the live oaks that are already on the plaza, big, broad characteristics of shade and cooling. But all of those create a threshold and a sense of scale. So again, that opening for the mission footprint is even more strongly articulated against the city. And where possible, those trees are actually pushing some of the modern components of the city, like the Emily Morgan, back a little bit. So they're not so prominent in your experience. Finally, we do think there is certainly a place for trees within the footprint. This is not a design. We have a lot of work to do to figure out the perfect balance between shade, which creates enough cooling and human comfort that people actually want to be there and engage in the interpretive components of being in this kind of a landscape, and not blocking views or making it hard to use the space. But we do think it's important. And obviously the future studies of archaeology are going to influence where we would want to do dig to put trees and where we would not. So what does this look like? Well, we've just started to sketch through some sort of possible ideas. This image shows a kind of a moment of transition between the plaza, which you see to the left, and the historic footprint, which you see to the right. Imagine that there's a kind of a brick paving or some other kind of beautiful paving material that really delineates that Alamo district. You then pass through planted areas. Those could be native plantings, something that feels very indigenous to the place, creating a series of these kinds of thresholds that you mark as you move into a more open area, where another paving material, maybe it's more like a stone, much more of the earth, again, as much as possible using local materials here. And that transforms your understanding of where you are. And then within that, you start to mark the actual lines of the mission on the ground so that you see where those historic walls once were. We haven't picked materials. We're really in a process of investigation, but we have looked at the kinds of and the quality of the materials we want to use. And we think everyone on the management committee has gotten behind the idea that these are not the normal everyday pavers that you see throughout the city. They're clay bricks, they're stone materials. They are the kinds of materials that make you say, it's not just a world-class museum, it's a world-class experience overall. And this will be an incredibly distinct place within the city, partly because of the quality of detail and the quality of materials that we think we can bring to bear to create this kind of quality of space and place.
So Eric just walked through kind of the first chapter, right? We said that we were going to take a look at these new parameters from a spatial, a site design point of view, and then look at it from a visitor experience standpoint. So when we think of visitor experience, really what we start to focus on is the fact that whether you are a local from San Antonio and you have been for generations, or whether you're a visitor, international or national, when you come to the Alamo and as a district, what our goal is to provide a clear sense of arrival, but even more importantly, an understanding of orientation and an understanding of the Alamo as a place. And so when we think about not just the site design, when we start to think about how these impact these new parameters and what they might have on the general experience of how somebody might approach and enjoy this district and their time and their emotional connection at the Alamo, we have to think about it from a slightly different way. So the next few slides are going to pop through that a little bit. And we still do it from an understanding of the entire place. And we start by thinking about the arrival and our goal of defining the arrival to this district from all points of view. And so you'll see that these arrival points are focused elements that they start to narrow down, whether they be from the south or the north. And Eric has already stepped through the thought process of defining this district and celebrating this arrival. but we also think about this space as separate zones. And so when you go to the next slide, it starts to speak to the fact that as you experience this entire district, there are distinct zones to it, whether it be the plaza on the south, the historic footprint, the garden area, the experience that's very specific to the church in Long Barrack, or even the future museum and visitor center. Each of these have different experiences and different elements to them. But also when we think about these zones, we can think about it from really a management point of view, and to think about providing flexibility. One aspect that one parameter that we are studying here is the desire to be more porous and more open to the public. And so when you think about encouraging that access for the public to be through the historic footprint at any point in time, what it really starts to create is two separate areas of managed access, one being the museum and visitor center, and the other on the right-hand side being the church and the garden. Providing flexibility doesn't mean that it precludes certain things from happening. So the next slide starts to say, at certain times, might there be the ability, now that we can start to study the site design a little bit, is there the ability to have that historic footprint be accessible for events or for certain activities where some of those entry points are managed? And so you'll see that the difference between those two. Our goal is to leave this as a flexible management option, but also leave it open to the public, and also leave it flexible to be potentially closable for events. And really, in summary, you start to look at it a different way, and this a critical shift in the thinking for this new test. Previously, this is a slide from the previous interpretive plan, in that we were talking about a single perimeter and with one focused entry point at the museum and visitor center. And what we are saying now with our new analysis is there is a shift, and we are talking about two secure perimeters, open access through the historic footprint to the public at any time. But what that creates is the desire to have two separate secure perimeters and 2 points of entry, one at the museum and visitor center and a separate secure perimeter for the church experience. And you'll see in the future slides, we're going to start to go through a similar build-up type of visitor experience to prove how we thought about this in greater detail. When we talk about secure perimeters, you'll see that there are some notes on secure from a vehicular standpoint as well. We will touch on that. But what we will start to touch on in the future build-up slides that Erica is going to bring us through now is how this revised approach, how we can still address it without sacrificing security issues, without sacrificing that sense of orientation that's very important to us, and the sense of understanding of the Alamo as a place. And so you'll see these next series of slides start to speak to all three of those items.
So when we think about visitor experience, of course, we start with one of the principles, the guiding principles, which is that this project must be understood within the context of the other great historic and cultural landscapes of the city, and even within the important active cultural landscapes of our own time. And this drawing just begins to reference the ones closest, but certainly should zoom out and look at the rest of the missions, understand its relationship to the cathedral, and a dozen other sites. But the idea here is that we think by reaching out and creating this district, we particularly can drive and make a kind of interpretive set of relationships between what's happening here and the great historical components of the cultural landscape in the city. At the closest level, of course, we think that it's about interpreting and engaging people the moment that they arrive at any edge of the site. So imagine that wherever you are, there's an information opportunity. And those are really doing two things. They're guiding you into the site, explaining how to arrive and where to go next, but they can also make connections outside. So imagine if you're coming at the intersection of Commerce and Alamo, that those signs are pointing you both up to the church, but also reminding you that La Villita and Hemisphere are just down across the bridge to the south. So again, this idea that it's really in the context of the whole city is critically important. But each of those information areas, we think, have the opportunity to direct you to the next sort of moment of interpretation. And really, whether you're coming from the south or the north, they ought to guide you to somewhere where you can meet a person and someone can help you understand the full context for what is available here in this site. So coming from the south, we think there's an opportunity for a kind of visitor kiosk or orientation hub in the plaza outside the Menger. And then, of course, there's another opportunity within the buildings along the west wall, which will ultimately be developed into a visitor center and a museum. These two elements, the opportunity in the plaza, we think is really exciting. We've looked at sort of precedents of kind of open air outdoor pavilions where interpretation and guidance happens. We worked on one here in Boston for the National Park Service for what's called the Harbor Islands National Park. Here, anybody walking along this park in the Greenway is greeted by a shaded, rain-protected structure where the rangers stand out here and help people understand how to access this park. Inscribed on the ground is a map that shows all of the islands and a series of signs which tell everybody what is available if they go out to the islands. This doesn't need to be a big structure like this, but the idea that there's a moment in the plaza where anyone coming from the south is given this kind of welcome to the site, we think is a great opportunity. These two moments work hand in hand. Certainly, it's not a full-scale visitor center and it's not a museum. So the guides who might be in that space would direct people further up to access the full museum and visitor center, which would take place in the buildings on the west side of the mission. Once you've arrived at either of those, we have the opportunity to then direct people to a central access location to go into the church in Long Barracks. So just like today, there's a queuing. So we're managing the flow of people through the historic church. We would direct people to a space again for that. Where exactly that is and exactly how that functions is a matter of design, but it's important to be able to interpret that for people. And so the idea that you're capturing people at these moments and then directing them there, we think is really important for the visitor experience. We also might use those two opportunities to direct people out into the footprint, where again, there's like the outdoor museum and living history taking place. So whether you're coming from the south and being directed or coming from the north and the west, each of these serves as a kind of threshold, helping people understand what they're about to experience and all of the resources that are here. We know that so many people today don't even understand what's available. The really exciting part about this, as John said, is that that means that you can leave the actual footprint unobstructed, without railings, without walls, such that someone who is just a citizen of the city who wants to move north to south can continue to walk up Alamo right through this outdoor museum and continue on their way. Same on Houston, east-west, and on Crockett. So this allows both ends to happen. We also think this allows, because we're not lowering the ground plane, to enable the really important parts of contemporary life in the city. So we think we can accommodate the parades moving through. This requires that the north wall interpretive element be demountable, so twice a year that comes down and we can access the site. We also think it's important that we think about the actual footprint being a quiet zone. Not the place where the grandstands are, but still having a ceremonial space outside the church in which the laying of the wreaths can take place and the other ritual events. And then there's a lot of opportunity to the south, particularly under the shade of all of those great trees, to have the grandstands and to have the more active portions of the parades. This also allows you to start to think, as John said, about the zones having different characteristics. Right now we have trouble because the plaza is both kind of the active, lively part of the city and trying to serve as an interpretive space and as a reverent space. Here, this allows us to delineate that outdoor museum and ceremonial zone and to have this vibrant event plaza to the south. We think that there's probably a code of conduct within both of these spaces that focuses that outdoor museum around the kind of activities that are conducive to reverence and outdoor learning. And the event plaza then can be a space for First Amendment and larger scale gatherings and activities. As John said, this is all predicated on an idea of how to manage a vehicle access to the site so that it can be basically entirely pedestrian, so that people walking through here feel safe. They don't have to worry about where the cars are. So just like in the original plan, we think primarily we hold access to the edges. Where you see each of those sort of do not enter signs, there would be bollards or some other kind of control device that would keep the vehicles out. We still have access to drop off at the Menger and at the hotels, and ultimately to have all of the adjacent properties continue to function as they do today. We recognize that there's still emergency access and some service access, as John said, that is necessary. So we would accommodate vehicles as needed to come up through on the south part of Alamo, turning left on Crockett, and then also in front of the Emily Morgan. Again, these are access sites for emergency access particularly, but that still protects the primary elements of the church and the long barrack, and of course, any of the pedestrians that are in the site. We are really excited and interested in this idea about phasing the street closures. So we think there's an early phase here in which Alamo between Houston and Crockett could be closed. We know this was tested out during the ceremony earlier in the month. And so the opportunity to do that, also the 18-pounder exhibit is going up, which would allow that to be more directly connected to the church and the other parts of the site, and really to begin to see how we can program that site and to really understand the impacts on traffic. That would allow us to leave one lane of Alamo open, coming up from Commerce, taking a left on Crockett the way it was during the ceremonies. And that would allow us to potentially really use that lower section, because we are going to gain 2 lanes of traffic as pedestrian space to potentially be festival-like, food trucks, outdoor gathering, seating. We don't really know, but we think it could be transformative in terms of the character of the site, and especially for those adjacent property users. We know that there have been lots of temporary activation of sites like this, and we just show a couple of different images, but it really has the opportunity to be a kind of exciting and temporary transformation.
So the last chapter is really the shortest one as well. So we've gone through some spatial and site design conversations, some visitor experience conversations. We didn't want to leave our presentation without speaking interpretively. And we spoke of terms of reverence and the goal of orientation and an understanding of the Alamo. But we also have to remind everybody that all of these parameters that we are studying, whether they be not lowering the grade or permeability and lack of railings, those do not change our overall goal of telling the importance of the entire history of the Alamo and all of the stories, to understand the lives and events and the stories that shape the Alamo, no matter it be from the mission era to the battle and the Texas Revolution stories, but also post-battle history. We understand that this space is one to tell all those stories, and the ability to do it via self-guided exploration or experiencing living history, and in those spaces right where history happened, right in the footsteps of where history happened, is extremely important and extremely powerful for the emotional connection of anybody visiting the Alamo. And so a single slide as a reminder that it is important to us to retain all those, and we do not believe that any of these moves or any of the new parameters that we're studying, again, whether it be porous, whether it be the Cenotaph staying in place, what it really does is it prevents different opportunities and increased opportunities when it comes to the post-battle stories even, to be able to be told. And so this slide certainly doesn't do it justice for the number of stories that need to be told, right? This is a diagram which does a very broad swath of examples, certainly does not document all of the great stories to be told, but it is a reminder and a way for us to share the importance and the work that our team has been doing together with ATI, and now we're excited to share some of the interpretive and content development progress here in the later months. But to be able to state that a lot of these parameters that you've seen today do not impact the goals and do not impact the success that we believe of telling all of these stories, both in the plaza and the historic footprints, as well as throughout the district. You'll see in the garden and even in the South Plaza. So that being said, we wanted as a reminder, and while Francisco, I'll hand it back to you. There's a reminder here of, again, the 5 key elements that we are retaining, as well as the next slide, it gets into another reminder of the proposed changes. And with that, Francisco, I'll leave the slide on this one. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, y'all. So for the folks at home, now is where we need to hear from you. We're going to invite you in a moment. We're going to open up the line for you to submit your comments. Eric, can I ask you to, excuse me, John, can I ask you to put up that last slide again?
Sure.
Yep, that was me.
Just to kind of frame. Great. So for where we are in the process, San Antonians, we're really engaging the Alamo Citizens Advisory Committee and you, the viewing members of the public, in the question of, have these proposed changes to the Alamo plan thoughtfully and successfully really met our original vision and guiding principles and adhered to the 5 key concepts, right? As you look at these proposed changes, the Cenotaph will be repaired but not moved. The mission footprint will be delineated and not lowered to the living surface. The plaza will remain accessible to pedestrians without railings or permanent enclosure in that way. Parades and key rituals will be accommodated, and the streets will be closed as planned and approved, with allowing emergency services, public transit, and then also there'll be some temporary reprogramming and early closure in June 1st. So that gives you a sense of what's up. And so the question now, thank you. You can unshare that. Now let me share something else. All right. So are you seeing the question panel? Give me a thumbs up if you're looking. Great. So members of the public, what we'd like for you to do is send us your thoughts on what was just presented. Any questions you have, we'll be able to put them to the team to speak to them in real time. And so you now have the opportunity to send us your comments and your questions while the members of the Alamo Citizens Advisory Committee are weighing in roll call style on what's been presented and what thoughts they have. So here's what we need you to do. If you'd like to submit a comment or a question, go into your text messaging feature and type address it to 22333, and then submit a message that just says ACAC, and that'll essentially plug you in to the app that we're using to send in your comment. You'll get a confirmation letting you know that you are good to go, and then type in your message. So it's that simple. Send ACAC to the number 22333. That'll get you registered in this. And when we come back from the roll call, we will address your questions and comments in the order received. Okay? So hopefully that works. And we'll look forward to hearing from all of you when we come back from the roll call. So now, Rhea, I'll turn it over to you to lead us through the roll call. For our ACAC members, we're going to ask you, since we really want to hear from the public and we want to hear from everyone on the committee, we're going to ask you to keep your comments to about a minute. You'll have certainly other future opportunities to have more dialogue with one another. But if you could give us your thoughts on, do you feel like the proposed reimaginings presented honor the vision and guiding principles and honor the 5 key concepts that were part of the Alamo plan? When you're at about a minute, I will react with the little emoji for applause. You'll see it on my little screen. And if you go much over a minute, I'm gonna pull out the hook and bring in, so we can hold the time for everyone. So give me a thumbs up if we're all clear on how we're proceeding. Terrific. All right, Rhea, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Francisco. And we'll go in alphabetical order with the tri-chairs closing, so you all can make plans on when you're going to speak. Sharon Agian.
Thank you. Good evening. I do believe that it falls in line with our guiding principles and what we've been charged with this reimagining of space. I'm excited and enthusiastic about the concept of the delineation of the space, whether that be with natural materials, the vegetation, the pavers, etc. Being able to show that footprint in the markings on the ground is spoken about, and recognizing again that these are initial stages. These are not actual designs, but just conceptually. I think it's great. I also think it's exciting from the visitor perspective, be it San Antonians who have not visited the Alamo in a long time, or tourists that are coming to San Antonio, for them to have that large experience that is deserving of what the Alamo footprint should be. So thank you.
Bill Brindle.
Thank you. I in my thinking about the whole process at this point is the coming back to life of the group and of the plans. I think the decisions to keep the Cenotaph where it is, the decision to not have to lower the ground plane, to not create one secure perimeter, really has opened up the design to some of the non-confrontational issues where flow will still be maintained, and the Cenotaph certainly will still maintain a reverent place in center of the footprint, but it also opens up all these other options, closing the street early and getting a better feel for the plaza, not having one way in and one way out, and all those things I think are kind of rejuvenating to the plan and exciting, and I think that's what gave a lot of the citizens kind of pause before, that it was going to change so much of the plaza that they frequent so often. And so that's my thoughts at this point.
Matt Brown.
Hi, everyone. So not to repeat anything, I'm just going to say everything that's been said before me, and I bet everything after I totally am on board for. I think this is a great it's a great framework, a great vision. I want to commend the tri-chairs, and I know all of the Lori Houston and all the staff and people have been working incredibly hard on this. And as one of the members of this committee, I experienced being heard and listened to and seeing the weekly updates and advancements of really, sort of great collaboration. So that's fantastic. And I also sort of witnessed that, we know that this space, is a space that is an epicenter of many histories and many stories. And so I see the desire for not just a world-class museum and visitor center and a world-class Alamo or evolution, but its connection into a world-class experience throughout the greater downtown. Like that expansion of our vision, I think, is natural and fantastic. And also I see now that the plaza and the Alamo will be a place where history will continue to be made. So it won't just be frozen in time, but it's going to be a place where our citizens can come and continue to advance this great city. And so I'm looking forward to that.
Forrest Bias?
Yes, I agree with most that's been said also. The delineation, the pavers or possibly other material that looks more period correct. The accessibility of the plaza, I'm somewhat in agreement with. If we have living history events, let's say, I don't think it's proper for people just to be coming and going through that at the time. So there has to be some sort of something to happen with the, the gates, let's say, not necessarily gates, but access points being able to be managed better than just allowing people to flow in and out if events are going there, such as living history and stuff. And then the coming up, as I said earlier, the coming up with that 18-pounder, I like that. First thing coming up, and we have to get that street closed, I think sooner better than later, because the weather's warm and people are going to be out and about and crossing that street and stuff to see the new Interpretive corner is going to be important. Streets closing, so that's my main deal. I'm happy with most everything.
George Cisneros?
Yes, I thought that this design showed a major evolution on the part of the design group in becoming sensitive to San Antonio. It shows a stronger awareness and almost more of an archaeological, anthropological, sociological sensitivity that you guys have done. So thank you very, very much. It does show and include, we have a pretty big cultural DNA here, and you are more aware of it than you were when you first arrived here 3 years ago. But I want to make sure that in the design, we have a full demarcation of all the existing cemeteries as found in maps available through the Catholic Chancery and the Bexar County Archives. I spoke about this in terms of the paths and the texturing. It's also very significant on the part of the city now that the Alamo Mission Archaeology Advisory Committee is more inclusive and will include the descendants of the people who are buried in those cemeteries. I thought that was a really big step. And finally, and while it's not exactly a design element, I just always want to pay attention and encourage people to critically address the jeopardy within Section 15 of the lease. And we must ensure that Alamo Plaza will belong to the people of San Antonio, and to avoid providing any temptation for future city councils that would lead towards the sale or transfer of the title of Alamo Plaza to the state of Texas. Thank you.
Anthony Edwards? Mr. I think you're on mute. Can you try again, sir? Looks like you're unmuted, sir. We'll try again, but if you want to submit your comments in the chat, we can have those on the record. And we can try you again after I go through the rest of the list. Colonel Huffine?
Yeah, thank you, Ray. I'm with Forrest. The overall plan up to this point, and I mean overall, there's some picky spots that I'd like to addressed, but now's not the time for it. I am keenly concerned with the 1 May shutdown of Alamo Street. I noticed that on the slide it still said 1 June, but that's an additional 4 weeks of children crossing that street and potential safety hazards and things like that. There's going to be a tremendous amount of people visiting the new exhibit, and I just want to be as safe as we can possibly be. And right now the date seems to be 1 May for that. That's all. Thank you.
Christine Jacobs. Christine, are you with us? I think you're still muted. Okay, well, we will try again with you as well. Dave Krupinski.
Thank you, Rhea. I agree with a lot of what has already been said by my colleagues on this call. I think it does meet the 5 concepts, and it does honor the guiding principles. I have mentioned this before, but I just want to be cognizant of the the construction schedule rather, for when we look at hosting IPW. I just want that on record. And I think that, the visitor experience has been really thought out well. And I love the reverent sense of place, but I'm really even more impressed about the multiple flow patterns, as well as the 2 information kiosks that will help with providing wayfinding. So overall, very good. Thank you.
Dr. Lattimore.
Well, I don't have a lot to add. And of course, I'm new to the group as well. But I mean, a really good job to the designers and to the team for putting this together. I know there are a lot of different challenges that have come because of this, and I really think that the team did a wonderful job. The one thing as we move forward that I would like to stress is that as we look to telling the full story, the whole story as we see it, with our guiding principles, those stories also include full stories of the stories that we tell. And so when we look at those buildings and we think about the stories in those buildings, that may lead to other buildings. And so, for example, if we look at the Woolworth building, there's a whole other story that leads to Houston Street as well. We want to ensure that we're not just telling the story of that Alamo area, but that full area that's also part of that. So expanding the area to me is important to the entire story. Thank you.
Okay, we will try Christine again. I'm trying to send the unmute because she's only on the telephone. Christine, can you try? Okay, I'm not sure it's going to work right now. Seneca McAdam.
Yes, I want to say this has gone above and beyond. I'm so happy with the direction that we're going in. It seems to me like we are really hitting on all of the principles that we are really looking to address, and definitely making sure that we keep our sense of reverence about what happened there on that battleground as well. I believe that this is a great step forward. And first and foremost, I'm also really happy to see that the Cenotaph repair is definitely one of the biggest points that we are looking at. I do agree with several of my colleagues that have talked about the safety of our pedestrians when they're walking around, and I am very concerned about that, and making sure that we keep this as safe as possible, and making this just an absolutely amazing sight to see. Thank you.
Patricia Mejia.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now? This is Christine Jacobs.
Should we let Christine go?
can wait. I'm just happy you can hear me. Let me know when you're ready for me.
Yeah, no, Christine, go ahead, since we got you.
Okay, sorry for the WebEx challenge. This is Christine Jacobs. I'm superintendent at San Antonio Missions National Historical Site. I'd like to start by saying thank you for the leadership of the group, and I really do think that this plan is consistent with the guiding principles. I'm extremely encouraged by the inclusive nature of the overall approach, in particular the attention to the anthropological and historical research, connection to descendant communities. I really think it reflects an understanding about the living landscape and the role, honestly, of the site with regard to cultural continuity within Texas and San Antonio in particular. I appreciate that the more formal kind of entrance exit to the south. I think it's a really important connection in the context of the World Heritage Site to the other 4 missions that comprise the World Heritage Site within San Antonio Missions National Historical Park as well. We just really look forward, the Park Service, to collaborating, especially on the interpretive aspect of the plan, to help support the inclusion of the San Antonio community, our neighborhood partners, and provide, really a very seamless visitor experience within the site as a whole. That's it.
Okay, thanks. Patricia.
I don't have much to add. My colleagues have done such a great job. I just want to thank the city staff as well as our consultants for creating this wonderful process in this short amount of time. Have done an incredible job of really illustrating their intention to hear and as well as to implement some of those suggestions into both the plans and just the process overall. So just grateful for that. If there was one thing I just wanted to highlight and commend the group for, it's just the city staff's effort in creating the Alamo Archaeological Committee. I'm really appreciative of that new nuance and voice to this process.
Mr. Edwards, it looks like we've got you unmuted. Can you try again, please? Okay, we will try one more time at the end. Aaron Pena?
Yes, I don't think there's much more that I could add that hasn't been said. I'm pleased with what's been proposed. I want to thank the staff for the work they've done. I'm glad we're moving forward. We need to keep the work going. Well done. I have nothing else to add.
Roger Perez?
Yeah, I don't have much that at all. I think you're moving in the right direction. It's a great continuation. Let's keep going. There's obviously going to be a lot more details that are going to come in this place, but it's a great start, a great move in the right direction. Thank you.
Davis Phillips?
Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. I think one of the questions that I have, first of all, yes, we're moving in the right direction. I think they've done a good job of beginning to overcome some of the obstacles that we've had at this point. I would say that the first time we saw the list of new parameters, there were 5. Tonight, there were 4. The one that was left out was repurposed historic buildings. So I'm not sure why it was left out, but I wanted to make that point. The second thing is that while the markings on the visual that you showed us make sense, the markings on the ground, no guest is going to have that viewpoint. They're all going to be physically on the ground. We have some of those markings today, and they don't make any sense because there's no context to what the change in the pavement color or use of the pavement really is. So that has to be thought about. The other thing is I wasn't completely clear as you continue to work through this concept to make sure that there's clear, easy access from Alamo Plaza to Houston Street for businesses that are down that way. And the last thing I would mention as we go through this conceptual phase is there's been a lot of concern and hand-wringing and discussion and effort given to how to accommodate the parades that occur once a year. But I think that we need to have that same effort and concern on the impact of the businesses that this is going to have, that they operate every day of the year, they employ thousands of people, and there haven't been a whole lot of thought given to that just quite yet. And I realize we're in the conceptual phase, but my example is the parades show how that could work. But the buses, the tour buses, and the horse carriages need to be able to come up at least to the point of Crockett Street and turn left. That doesn't impact the footprint, doesn't harm the Alamo, doesn't harm the guest experience, but it would harm the businesses if that's not allowed.
Ernesto Rodriguez.
I just want to say I agree with the plan. I think it's good. I just want to make a statement that I hope that personal agendas don't hinder the plan as we move forward. But I think it's starting to look really great.
Walter Cerna. Walter, you might still be muted. Are you still with us? Okay, we will come back and try one more time. Dr. Skrabarczyk.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes,
okay, good. I like the plan. I like what I see. I liked most everything that I saw. I haven't seen anything that I could single out and say, you know, I don't like. I like. I am concerned about the rising damp on the Alamo Church and the roof. I'd like more information about how we're going to handle that. But overall, it's great. I'm looking forward to seeing now the interpretive piece as we move forward. Thank you. Y'all have done a great job. I appreciate it.
This is Walter Cerna. I think I was unmuted earlier. I was having trouble unmuting. I think Francisco intentionally muted me and would let me speak, but just kidding. But I just want to say I don't have a lot to add either. I saw the plan earlier in the day. I'm excited that you all are taking into account the rich tradition that Fiesta adds to the Alamo, the rich tradition of the parades, the rich tradition of the investiture of King Antonio. For those of you that don't know my role, I am president of the Fiesta Commission this year. So, we just want to make sure that the traditions that have been there for years and years continue at the Alamo because it means a lot to those PMOs that put on these events and the city as a whole. So thank you for including us, and we're excited the parades are going to continue to be able to go through the Alamo, in front of the Alamo. But thank you.
Ramon Vasquez.
Thank you. Yeah, I also, want to just thank the city for the decisions that it's made. I believe they were way overdue, and I'm so thrilled to be working alongside some of my colleagues on some of the proposed reports. It's much needed work for this project. So I think it's really early in the reset, but I don't think any of the proposed ideas violate or go against the guiding principles. I'm not, I can't say that I think it honors them because I don't think we've gotten into the meat and potatoes, right, of all this. I think we're very early in this, so I don't think it violates any of the guiding principles. So I think it could only enhance it. I'm hoping. I do have some things that I just want us to just keep. I'm concerned about, and I think that we need to build into this process moving forward. The Alamo is still a world. I keep hearing it's a world-class site, but it's already a World Heritage Site, right? And so it's also a national historical landmark and district. And so there are things that we have to, and I still believe that this is going to be a Section 106 project at some point. I still believe that. And so I want us to do our due diligence and make sure that we look into the future as much as possible and anticipate some of these things and build them into our process that we need to be aware of. Like part of the cemetery is underneath the federal post office. We know that. We know that the GSA has not ruled on whether they're going to have input or not on the cemetery. We're going to find all that stuff out. I also know, we know that bodies have been found underneath Houston and Alamo Street on both sides. So, and the UDC, we know that there are certain things about the UDC that we should probably pay attention to because other citizens of this city are going to be paying attention to it. And if we have, if we make decisions, we should be as transparent as possible about them. So that would be my concern, is that we move forward without building these things in, that we don't look as far as possible into the future and pull some of these things out, right? So, but again, congratulations on all the hard work. Lori Houston, all the effort that you've put on putting together the committee, the new committees, and the work that you've done with me and other lineal descendant groups. I appreciate it. So that's about what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Mr. Edwards, can we try one more time? You appear to be unmuted on our end. Okay. Does not look like it's going to work. Aaronetta Pierce.
I'd like to thank everyone for their thoughtful comments. It is a sign of progress that we are understanding and appreciating the importance of that location and the importance that has been put into trying to make it meaningful for all the layers of history that require being told. We do have the hard work ahead as we get to the interpretive sites, but I do think that as a landscape, it has changed in a way that now we have a beautiful story to overlay on a world-class site. So I'm appreciative to all of you for your comments. I think that we still have to roll up our sleeves and do some of the hard work, but your attitudes, your requests for trust, transparency, and progress are significant, and we plan to continue that going forward. I add to Ramon's comments, my comments to Lori and her staff, who have been meticulous in their efforts to inform and lead. And we appreciate that very, very much. I'm honored to serve with the Councilwoman and Sue Ann Pemberton, noted in her own right. And we have a lot of work to do, but we are moving ahead together. And that colloquial spirit is a good start. Thank you.
Sue Ann Pemberton.
I cannot disagree with anything really on the presentation and the recommendations that we saw this evening. Delineating the footprint without the need for railings and enclosures and ground depressions, I think is a good effort in moving forward in opening the plaza for public access. I also think that this visitor and information center kiosk, or whatever it turns out to be, will serve as a very critical component for the years prior to a visitor center and museum, and also as a 24/7 no pressure training center or teaching center for the site. And I think that will be very welcome, so that people can kind of understand where they are and what they're viewing. I also am pleased that there is a respect for the traditions that we hold so dear in San Antonio, and the respect for the indigenous culture as well, and others that have occurred on the site and will continue to do so. Thank you.
Councilwoman Diagon.
Thank you. Thank you all so very much for your participation, for your feedback. Mr. Edwards, I am sorry that this is happening. I want to make sure that we at least get you on the phone so we can have your comments here because they're so important. As we have gone through this, one of the things that I also set out was not what is the best that can happen through this project for all of us. And I really appreciate you all coming together, being open, being honest, and really being open and honest with us as tri-chairs so we could get to this point. Thank you to TJV, Reed Hildebrand, for also listening and hearing and incorporating that into what we have moving forward, or what we have right here, to expand the cultural landscape, to, of course, the more public accessibility is very key. And we're also taking your feedback and hearing what you're saying today so we can continue to see how we can incorporate that in as we move forward as a management committee. So I think we are at a very good point. Thank you all.
Okay, let me share that real quick. Hold on. Francisco, this is Lori Houston. I have Anthony Edwards on the phone, and I got his comments, and he says that he's supportive of what's presented, but when it comes to the cenotaph, he wants to make sure that we do our research to identify any omissions and correct them. So if there were names that were left off, make sure that we address that when we do the repair. Is that correct, sir? Okay, he's good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Lori. And thank you, Mr. Edwards, for bearing with us. Great job, team, on the creative problem solving. Glad we got a chance to hear from everyone. So now let's hear from the community members that have been participating from home. Let me get this dialed up. So now we're going to show the responses. So we've had a number of responses come through, and what we're going to do is we're going to scroll everything that came in. But as we go through, since this is a Q&A session, if we've already answered the question, we're going to take that as answer given. I am going to put your comment up so that we all see the feedback that's been coming in from community. But if it's something that's already been addressed previously, we won't be spending time on it again, just so you're aware. So the first couple of comments that we had were really focused on the cenotaph, and there were a number that were, in fact, let's get these up here, right? So there were a lot of folks that were curious about more detail for what the plan is to repair the cenotaph. Can we speak to that a little bit?
Sure. A lot of that work will be done through the design effort, but we will have to bring in experts to assist with that repair plan, and it will require a permit from the Texas Historic Commission. And so we need to develop that repair plan. It will be experts who will help us, experts in stonemasonry and other areas, and it will be reviewed by the THC, and they will be required to give us a permit. So this is not being done with the current consultants. This will be done with experts who are very familiar with this type of work.
Thank you, Lori. Next question, and we had a few questions about this. Curious about understanding what's the timeline for a return to public meetings as opposed to remote meetings. And so let's see.
Yes, unfortunately, we're still in, we're coming towards the end of the pandemic, but right now we're still doing our public meetings virtually. We do have the city council action on April 15th. that will be in person at council chambers, and there will be protocols for public attendance at that meeting. And hopefully by the summer, our interpretive plan exercises that we'll be doing in May, June, and July, we'll be able to do some of those in person.
Great. Thank you, Lori. Our next question, or our next comment is the San Antonio African American Community Archive and Museum appreciates the new direction. We are extremely interested in the museum exhibits. And let's see if we can get that to populate up. So that was more of a comment. Next one, I really love these changes, especially not enclosing the plaza. How soon will the street closures happen?
So right now, what we're proposing is to have them closed by June 1 of 2021. So that's in about 2 months. We will see what we can do about accelerating that, but we can say that they will be closed by June 1 if council approves the proposed design assumptions and lease agreement. Now that is just for the section of Alamo between Houston and Crockett Street. As you saw, we're proposing a phased approach. The sections of Alamo from Crockett to Commerce, those will be closed when we start construction on the site. But paramount to all of that is a strong business and stakeholder outreach plan. And we will make sure that we're coordinating with all the stakeholders so they are aware of, how are we going to be able to provide them their services, whether it's deliveries or other services they get, making sure they're aware of the construction schedule and other impacts the project may have, we'll be able to address.
Thank you, Lori. A couple of comments. Let's see if we can get them to come up. That seems to be helping. Next comment says, the narrative I hear is that the defenders of the Alamo were racists and drunks. That is not true. They fought for liberty for Texas. And then the subsequent comment, why does something so historic as the Alamo have to be reimagined or modernized when Texans love it just the way it is? Thank you for those comments. Next comment, thank you for accommodating the parades. The Battle of Flowers parade is 130 years old, and we represent the continuum of history. Thank you for the acknowledgement. So the next comment, I think, is more of a question, which is, tree canopy traps heat that should be dissipating and would be dissipating if grass were used. The University of Utah studied this in 2020. Any comment about the use of tree canopy versus grasses and other ground cover to our design team?
I'll say our experience is that those two things in concert are great. We certainly want shade to provide, because that's actually about human comfort in the shade. Certainly planting and vegetation on the ground, which is something we're very interested in doing, particularly in the plaza, is another important part for its transpiration and cooling. So we are definitely focused on trying to make this a wonderful place to be, even in the heat of the summer.
Great, thank you. The next question is about the Phil Collins collection. Did I miss anything about the Phil Collins collection and timeline? Is there going to be a facility on the Alamo premises first, and what is the timeline on that?
Kate Rogers, are you still on the call? If not, I can speak to that. So the Alamo Trust is proposing a collections building. We're proposing it to be in the area behind the church and Long Barrack. It'll be about 25,000 square feet, I believe. Most of it, the majority of it's going to be storage built to museum design standards to help store collections and exhibits. And then there'll be about 5,000 to 6,000 square feet for exhibit space to hold the Phil Collins exhibit, but ultimately that will go into the museum that's being constructed on Alamo Street. And that exhibit space will help accommodate traveling exhibits. We have confirmed that it will be in alignment with the Alamo Viewshed and follow those regulations. I do not have a timeline on that, and we will try to get that for you.
Thank you, Lori. Next comment, why not tell the mission story at the other San Antonio missions and tell the 1836 Battle of the Alamo at the Alamo? This is Texas Freedom Force. Thank you for your comment. The next comment, I'm not quite clear. Yeah, I'm not quite clear. Alamo Street must have closed and a push for the state to take a plaza. I'm not entirely sure what the question was in there. Lori, you catching there?
I mean, it could mean they want us to close the street earlier and the state to take the plaza. I would look at, I'm not sure what that means either.
Got it. Okay. Our next comment, I'm of the opinion that the Alamo Citizens Advisory Committee has members that are exemplary in many fields associated with and about the Alamo. Cut off the question. What would members consider their most? Darn, I'm so sorry. But I'm sure the committee members appreciate the comment. All right, next comment. The reimagined plan is wrong. It should be about the Alamo, not trees or bleachers. This is a shrine, not a tourist trap. And that got cut off. So thank you for your comments. Thank you again for allowing the parades to continue in front of the Alamo Chapel. It has been a 130-year tradition and part of our cultural history. Next comment. Are you going to make Texans out to be racist and that they were fighting for slavery during the Texas Revolution of Battle of 1836? Thank you for your comments. The acequia as a mere marking on the site will be easily ignored. Treat it as a water feature so that visitors can see, hear water, at least partially. Design team, any thoughts on that?
Yes, and I think if we are able to, having water on the site would be incredible, both from a perception point of view, a character point of view, and an interpretive point of view. We will absolutely investigate whether we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
And
Next
Francisco,
Yes.
I did want to mention that Tom Butler from Broadus texted me and said that the collections building will be done in 2022, late 2022.
Great, thank you, Lori. Next comment, we need financial accountability. Any insight on how that's going to be reported to the public?
Well, I do know that the state of Texas did do an audit, and that was released, and it did show that it was being managed appropriately. And the city of San Antonio will show how their funding is being spent once we get the project up and running. So there will be accountability embedded into our lease agreement.
Great, thank you. Next comment, why does the city of San Antonio and this commission believe it should drive these decisions versus the other 27 million Texans? I presume the last sentence was saying the Alamo belongs to Texas. Lori, could you again clarify what the operating agreement and kind of the different forms of collaborative stewardship are at the site to help answer the question in that comment?
So the Alamo project is done in partnership with three partners, the City of San Antonio, the General Land Office, and the Alamo Trust. So the General Land Office, they are focused on repairing and restoring the church and lawn barrack. And that work is currently underway, and they're also working on building the collections building that I recently talked about. The Alamo Trust, they're responsible for fundraising and designing the world-class museum that's proposed to be on the Crockett block, which are those buildings between that are on Alamo Street between Houston and Crockett, and they will be managing that. The city of San Antonio owns the plaza, and we are working on the design of the plaza. That's what we're focusing on tonight, and these assumptions will help us continue that. But ultimately, the area where the plaza sits on, which we refer to as the mission footprint, that is currently leased to the GLO, and that will continue so they can do the programming and tell all the stories. So the partnership remains intact, and each party has a responsible component, but we are all working through a cooperative agreement to make sure that we are coordinating. But it's a partnership with the state of Texas and the Alamo Trust.
Great. Thank you. Another comment on monthly accountability. I think you already spoke to that. Another comment. Why should Alamo Plaza belong to the city of San Antonio? It should belong to all of Texas. Another comment, question about the street closure. Why is the street closure to be delayed into June when the new Canon installation is coming up in the next couple of weeks? There's likely to be increased foot traffic.
We want to make sure that we're working with all the appropriate stakeholders, and we are working closely with the GLO and the trust on this request, and safety is one of our concerns as well. And so regardless of whether or not the street is closed early, I will make sure that we have the appropriate safety measures out on the site.
Okay. Another question on the Cenotaph, that's been addressed, but there was one question about would it be dismantled to repair it? We hadn't heard that before.
That would be identified in the repair plan. Most likely it would need to be dismantled, but I'm going to leave that to the experts, and that repair plan will have to be reviewed by the THC. That is not what we're taking action on right now. And the only thing that this committee is weighing in on is whether or not it should be repaired and it should stay in place.
Okay, thank you. Next comment, repairs to the Cenotaph are long overdue. Next comment, moving in the right direction, like the accessibility and connectivity, concerned over whether historical buildings will be reused for the museum. That's essential. In fact, Lori Davis had spoken to this earlier. Do you want to clarify kind of the state of that conversation?
Yes, and so when the mayor laid out his charge and what he'd like the project partners to revisit, one of them was to revisit the use of the Crockett and Worth buildings, specifically to repurpose those buildings. And we have shared that request with the Alamo Trust and the General Land Office, and they are doing their due diligence right now to see whether or not that can happen. So that request has been shared, and it's being considered by our other two partners.
Great, thank you, Lori. Next question about special event access. Will This Is Texas Freedom Forces Remember the Alamo ceremony with wreath laying still be able to host our annual event on the 1836 footprint each year?
We are going to be reviewing all the events that have traditionally occurred in the plaza, and then we will determine whether or not they have a tie to that site, and then we will put them in that operating agreement to make sure that people understand they are grandfathered in. So I can't answer that question. What I can say is that we will look at all those lists, all those events that have occurred traditionally, and confirm if they have a tie on the site, tie to the site.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Lori. Next comment, the battle needs to be the focus. Next comment, wondering why wasn't the meeting made public sooner? Lori, when people that are interested in following this, where should they be tracking to see upcoming meetings in the process, et cetera?
We do send out email blasts and notices. We did make this, we did make it public that this meeting would happen on March 8th. And then we also posted it on Friday and provided that 72 hours in advance. So it was, and it was shared with the media. So we have tried to get the word out.
Great, thank you, Lori. Next comment, this Alamo plan is a remake of the previous one, which did not have the approval of the citizens of Texas, moving the Cenotaph and rewriting history. Great, and so as we've established, the Cenotaph is not moving. So hopefully some folks are happy about that. Next comment, Randy Beal, director with This Is Texas Freedom Force. This story is not to be lied out. The 1836 battle had nothing to do with race. Thank you for your comment. Next one, how is the committee ensuring transparency to the public, financial planning, and reverence to Texas heroes? Laura, I know you talked about financial accountability earlier. Is there anything else worth sharing about kind of process, transparency, et cetera?
Well, the reverence to Texas heroes, a lot of that will be discussed throughout the interpretive plan. And we remain committed to provide the financial accountability, and those measurements could be included in the lease and operating agreement.
Great. Thank you. And then I think our earlier individual that had submitted the thoughts on the use of grass provided some follow-up resources. So Thank you very much. That'll be much appreciated. Next comment, you keep saying, tell the stories. What exactly will be said in those stories? And will those stories be disclosed and checked for historical accuracy? So Lori, what's the process for kind of the curating and validation of the stories that are to be told?
John Castman, can I ask you to weigh in on this question, please?
Sure. And part of, I'll do this in reverse order. We've been working directly with the Alamo Trust for all of the content development, and that goes through all the different eras of history and story, whether it be the mission era, battle stories, and also post-battle stories. And in addition to the Alamo Trust team, there is a long list of experts that we have been conferring with. And so those experts change depending on the content that we are discussing. And we've also been identifying other research projects where there are currently gaps, and we want those gaps to be filled. So that is the process that we have been undertaking. It's a comprehensive one. And when we talk about how those stories will be disclosed, Lori, your example of us being able to share some of that process in the coming months in May, June, and July, and likely we will start to come up with an outline with maybe by era, and we'll try to address all of the content and the current progress that we've been doing, including the research gaps, and also including the list of experts that we have conferred with and those that we have not yet conferred with. So I hope that answers, at least in general, the three separate questions that were there.
Great. Thank you. Another strong feeling that the cenotaph should not be moved, and it's not going to be. Hope you're happy with that.
This is
Yes,
Councilwoman. But to that point, Lori and John, still the vision and guiding principles of which this body came together with the themes and the goals is included in the telling of the stories. I just needed to say that for the record too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Councilwoman, apologies for not including that in the answer. That's as you can see from the presentation. Yeah, we start everything with the vision and guiding principles. So of course, yeah, it is included. Thank you for adding that.
Next question, can you please elaborate on what the plan is to replace the roof of the chapel with a lighter one?
Tom Butler, are you on?
Yes.
Can you speak to that question, please?
The current GLO work projects do not include replacing the roof to the church. That is something that will be studied in the future, but it's not currently under contract.
Great, thank you very much. And to our last question, Lori, perhaps you could speak to the management committee structure on this one. So as a Texan that doesn't live in San Antonio, who represents my views?
The General Land Office and the Alamo Trust and the City of San Antonio. But I mean, well, the General Land Office and the Alamo Trust would be those that would represent your views. We have membership on that committee that are from Austin, Dallas, and Houston throughout Texas.
Great. Thank you. So that is all of our public comment. That was 100%.
Francisco, I did see a question about veterans parades. We are looking at those parades. No, it's okay. Right now we're focused on the Fiesta parades, as those parades have specific ties to honoring the defenders. But as I mentioned earlier, we'll look at all events to see how they have a tie to the site, and we'll make a determination from there.
Thank you. So now, folks, let's take a little bit of time to respond to a little bit as a group of what we heard in the dialogue and what you think that means for us. Part of what we owe our design team is to try and reflect some of your feedback as well as some of the things that we heard from public comment in their work over the next few days before our next gathering and our conversation on Wednesday. So I would look to our tri-chairs first and give you the floor. Any thoughts or reactions to what you heard from your fellows on the advisory committee, or also from the public comment? And I know we just heard from Councilwoman Viagran, so maybe I'll turn to Sue Ann or Araneta to chime in, and we'll come back.
Well, I think as has been discussed at the beginning and as brought up again by Councilwoman Viagran, that the vision and guiding principles are critical. And I think one of the things that we need to point out to everyone, or to remind everyone, it's not just the front page, or what I call the cliff notes of the vision and guiding principles. It's a 16-page document that helps to explain what those mean. And so if there's any question, we should remind ourselves of the content of the rest of the document.
Thank you, Sue Ann. Araneta?
I appreciate the comments from the public. It's new voices that are always good to be added. Most of the items that they raise are items that we have in some way or another tried to address in our thought processes within our meetings. I like the references to documentation and accuracy. And as Laurie mentioned, we have scholars that will be helping us when we get to the interpretive version, to help us to make sure that anything that is added does have veracity and scholarly leadership supporting it. We are committed to informing you, and that means the public, with as much information as we can. And all along the way, we're at a point where we are moving forward, and we want to hear from you. If there's anybody who feels like they're not being heard out there in the community, we can always accept emails going forward. And as we are in that planning stage, this is the time for you to share any comments. But hopefully you will stay tuned to our process and help us to develop something that is really exciting and meaningful to San Antonio, and that when any of our citizens come to the plaza, that they will find themselves and their stories included in what we have created at the plaza. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ms. Araneta, for making the point that we are constantly collecting emails from the public. It's a good time to mention the public comment mailbox for this whole process is alamoplan@sanantonio.gov. That's alamoplan@sanantonio.gov. So any members of the public, exactly as Ms. Araneta Pierce just told you, we are constantly receiving and welcoming your emails so that we can be thoughtful and informed by what's important to you as a part of this process. So that is alamoplan@sanantonio.gov. Thank you, Ms. Araneta. So back to you, Councilwoman Viagran. Another thought, and then we'll kind of turn it open to the fellowship and see what everyone's thoughts are on the conversation so far.
Yes, thank you. And so a couple of things. I do thank the public comments for taking the time to text and share this. I do think it's important that we have maybe just an easy to find repository of where our meeting agendas are, where our meeting minutes are, and the public comments that they are part of our meeting minutes, so we can have that as we move forward. And then to the public, knowing that March 31st, we also have an agenda that's already been published for the agenda for March 31st meeting as well. And I do want to just I thank Lori for talking about, and I know some of our committee members mentioned closing the street sooner rather than later for safety reasons, and absolutely pedestrian and safety is key to all of us, for all of us. But to Lori's point, we believe that a good conversation and outreach to our business community in and around, our stakeholders and our business community in and around this area needs to happen to have, so the streets could be closed by June 1st, so we can have those, make accommodations for them where we need to. So I think that's part of it, but we can make the arrangements of what needs to happen to ensure that pedestrian safety when it comes to the opening of the events that they're going to be doing in the middle of April. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Ramon, you had a couple of thoughts in the chat. I want to certainly turn to you and give you the opportunity to give voice to your thoughts.
Yeah, as I appreciate all the work that everybody's been putting into this, especially our consultants that have been working on this project for the past 3 years. But I am concerned that that ATI or the state would be controlling the narrative of the historical events of the site. And I think that as equal partners, the city should definitely have just as much say so in terms of the consultants that are being chosen or the narrative that is being authored in terms of these historical events. I know we're doing it with the archival investigation for the cemetery, but the few documents that I have seen that have come out of the Alamo in regards to the mission or the cemetery itself or the natives that were there are highly, highly questionable. And these were not volunteered to me. But they were given to me in a different form, but for a different reason. So I just think that we need to assert ourselves too in that process, because I think that's the one that's what Councilwoman mentioned earlier about the meat and potatoes of the guiding principles. That's where we had all those discussions. That's where we chose, as the original members, decided what would constitute those stories. And we worked really hard to do that. And there was a lot of heartache, right? And we overcame it, and we all worked towards healing, when we came out of that. That's what we were hoping for. So I just want to just remind us of that. I'd like to see exactly how what we're authoring relates to each one of our goals and themes. I mean, I'm a visual person. I would love to see an arrow that says, here's this. This is how it relates to theme A, goal B. Because at this point, that's, when we're rebuilding trust, that's what I need. I need to rebuild that trust. And I need somebody to help me to do that, to see that authenticity. So I just wanted to say about that much. Thank you, Francisco.
And John, I'm sorry, Ramon and Francisco.
Yeah.
I want to say that that's a great idea, and that's how I think we need to frame this discussion in May, June, and July, is tie it to those themes in that vision and guiding principles and point to where those things are. And then, as I mentioned, you all help us identify the experts as well. So this is, we're still listening, taking feedback. That archival investigation will help us. But yes, that's why we're taking those 3 months to really look at that interpretive plan.
Understood.
Matt?
Let's see. One kind of reflection I have on the feedback, which tons of it was super valuable. But some people in the comments express things that I would consider as like a don't do, right? Like don't move the cenotaph, as an example. And we know we're not going to, but those types of comments, in my experience, and I've done a lot of market research, behind the scenes of those comments that don't do it, is some kind of concern or worry or fear. And so it'd be great to be able to, and I'm sort of an offer to our community, but also for the people who made those comments, to be able to kind of go back to that person and sort of dig into that. Like, why don't you want the Cenotaph to move? Or what are you concerned about if, like, when you say, like, I know it's not moving, Davis, I know, but when someone says, like, hey, all Texans love the Alamo just the way it is, right? That's a don't do. Like, don't change anything. It's great. Well, why is it great? Why do you love it, right? Do you love where the trees are right now? Like, do you love that Ripley's is right there in that spot? Like, what is it that you love? Because knowing that, what people really care about, then that can really inform, right, how the whole space gets designed. And not just the thing that we're looking at on that, right now that Eric shared, but the broader, downtown area, right? Because we're trying to, this piece of work is on top of, like, to me, it's like the epicenter of, like, not just the city, it's like the epicenter of, like, Texas history. It is an epicenter of American history. Like, this is American history, right? Like, it's many, many epicenters, right? So it's a big thing. And so it's going to spill out beyond the boundaries, right, of the Alamo that we're looking at. And so I just offer that, and as just a matter of curiosity, I'd love to dig into, those areas where someone's like, I'm feeling, nervous or concerned. Like, okay, let's dig in. Like, why? What do you love? What are you worried about? Because we can probably, chances are we can really, figure all that out or get really close to it, and I think Ramon, is saying some, like, from other places coming from the same kind of thing. Like, man, I'm really worried, that we will not get our history right, So, like, but when Ramon's talking, I'm like, oh, I get it. I get not only why you're worried, but, like, how we might remediate that, like how we might, like, go after and really build something that is as beautiful as it can possibly be. Nothing's going to be perfect, right? But it's as beautiful as it can be. So anyway, that's my reflection on what I heard and what I'd love to sort of, I'm curious about and want to dig more into.
Thank you, Matt. George?
I do support everybody's concern and everybody's advocacy for the highest level of scholarship and historical accuracy and historical research. Being in the visual arts world, though, how scholarship is translated into exhibit is very, very complicated. And that's where sometimes bias and ignorance are very obvious. I've been involved with many museum projects, great background, great research. And when we see the object that's on exhibit, it doesn't really reflect the research accuracy that was there. So we have to make sure that we are always, from the moment of research to the actual creation of the exhibit, that we're a part of that process. The exhibit making, can misinterpret things very greatly. And there is the Careta image over there at the Whitty right now with the talking man. That didn't come out anywhere close to what was the research that was done on it. That exhibit is pretty weak. But we have to be aware, though, that the designers, fabricators, and exhibit designers, are consistent with the research and the guiding principles.
Thank you, George. Who's got next? I want to make sure we hold the space for anyone that care to offer comments or even pose a question to one another. What are your thoughts on this?
So what are we going to spend an hour and a half on in a day from now, or 2 days from now? I'm confused. There's rapid fire meetings. What is the next meeting going to accomplish? We're voting on everything we've talked about today.
Great question, Davis. Lori, can you talk a little bit about, I know you stepped off camera for a second.
I'm sorry, what was the
Lori, are
question,
you out
Francisco?
there?
What is the
Sure.
question?
So Davis was asking, what specifically is the agenda and purpose for the Wednesday meeting?
The Wednesday meeting is for us to come back to you all with the high-level statements that you can vote up or down, similar to what we did in August of 2018. And so, for example, we will ask you to say yes or no to the following statement. Do you support repairing the cenotaph and keeping it in place. The next one will be, do you support designing the plaza in a manner that allows for traditional events and ceremonies to move through the plaza, such as the parades? So we need that specific direction so we can share with the management committee that the mayor asked us to look at these 3 things. We've done that. And this is the result of the management committee's feedback. I mean, sorry, and the advisory committee's feedback.
Davis, does that answer the question? Great. Thank you, sir. Ernesto would like to jump in here. Ernesto, are you able to come on camera and share your thought?
Oh, I'm on my phone because I'm actually traveling right now. We've been
Understood.
working on a research project, which is
Great.
why I want to make a comment. I find it very insulting when people start commenting about research that people are doing when they have no clue about the stuff that others are working on to try to promote the story. The other thing is we actually need to take into account that there are so many stories, so many things we need to work on, and there are people in the background that are actually constantly trying to find more and more information, whether it's here in the United States or in Mexico. And so I just want to make a comment that it's very insulting when someone says, well, they're not doing the actual research, or I know this. I'm like, I take it personally because I'm one of the people that spends my entire day researching. And so when I hear somebody say that, it just upsets me. That's all I want to say.
And
Thoughtful
Francisco, can
comment. Thank you,
I
Ernesto.
think that
Yes,
I
please
wanted
go
to
ahead.
add that is very thoughtful. And I think that's why we want to spend 3 months so we can talk about all the work that's done, because this body really hasn't had a chance to see it. And so some of these comments are coming because we haven't seen the work or they want to learn more about it. So I take your comment to heart. I understand that, but I think that's why I want to take May, June, and July so we can really dissect it, because there has been a lot of work that's done and there are a lot of great experts and there are other experts that can also add. But I believe that this body wants to understand the interpretive plan better than it was presented, for a 2-hour meeting in 2018.
Ramon?
Yeah, especially since we helped author the foundation of what that interpretation plan would include. So, like Lori says, we haven't been privy to that information. It's been kept from us. And so we'd like to see what the work that has been done, to see how it honors the work that we did for the whole year, because we also put a long time, a lot of hours into developing the meat and potatoes. So I appreciate the work that everybody's doing, but these comments come probably from a place of where we've been kept away out of that process.
And just as a process note, we really appreciate all the feedback to that effect that we heard during the listening circles that our tri-chairs were talking about earlier, because the process that Lori laid out earlier came as a direct response to what all of y'all in the ACAC indicated the people of Texas deserved, the people of San Antonio insisted on, and how we get to a great world-class experience that tells all the stories for everyone. So thank you for hanging in and really, I prefer to think in terms of calling each other in instead of calling each other out. So thoughtful comments, and the work continues. Who else has a comment? If we're trailing, certainly I don't want to take up any more of your evening.
Francisco?
Yes.
This is Colonel
Colonel,
Huffines. There's been a lot of talk about bringing in experts to speak and things like that, and I think that's a fantastic idea. We've heard from a few tonight.
Colonel, I think you might have cut out. Colonel? Colonel, it says you've got a bad signal. We will come back to you. Colonel, if you can hear me, mute your camera and then unmute it, and that'll often help reset your line. So we'll come back to you, sir, in a moment, hopefully. Sven.
In looking and listening to the comments and the questions, there seemed to be a concern that we were somehow rewriting history, when in fact the goal is to broaden the history and tell a more full and complete history and the many sides of history. So I just want to try and reassure people that we're not in the rewriting of history business. We are in the, our goal is to tell a bigger history, because the site has such an incredibly rich history in San Antonio and in the state and the nation and the world has been discussed. And people really should be able to understand that. So we're not rewriting.
Thank you, Renata.
So I'm
Other
back. I'm
thoughts?
sorry about that. I just
Oh,
wanted
wonderful.
to,
Excellent.
I apologize. Who are the experts that are going to be brought in or invited? What topics are they going to talk on? Things like that. I happen to know some extremely smart people on the Alamo. I'm not sure I'd classify anybody as an expert on the Alamo. So I'm curious who's going to put this list together. When are they going to speak? What evidence are they going to bring to the discussion, et cetera, et cetera. That's all.
So Lori, can you speak to that?
Yes, and so as I mentioned at the last meeting, we're gonna spend 3 months dissecting the interpretive plan, so PGAV and the other can share with us what it includes. They have a list of experts, but several of you have already sent me names of other experts you'd like us to look at. And as we go through and break down the themes, I'll reach out to some of the members who I know that are interested in that area just to make sure that we're not missing someone. But this will be similar to what we did early on when we had our first ACAC meetings in 2015. When we talked about Mission de Valero, we brought in Dr. Tiarina to kind of talk to us about the history of that. We have a whole list that the interpretive plan is using of experts that speak to different themes of the plan, whether it has to deal with the battle era, slavery, the mission. And so we will share that in advance. And as I mentioned, we are taking feedback or recommendations.
Lori, if I might add something, I think it also, hearing all the questions and the concerns, it also makes sense for us to do a broad agenda for the series of meetings, to share that with you, and then prior to that meeting to share the detailed agenda so that you guys can all understand what's coming, but also have some feedback as the agenda is being prepared to make sure that that you guys understand and don't feel like we're forcing the topics, but to get your impact on the order in which we place the topics and what we're talking about, what we're not. Like Sue Ann just spoke to, the history is so deep and so layered that even with the 5, however many meetings we plan on having, there certainly won't be enough time to touch on every topic to the level of detail that everybody wants it to. So we want to make sure that the agendas itself are also gotten feedback prior to doing.
And we'll be working with the tri-chairs on developing that curriculum for May, June, and July. And as I mentioned, I'll be reaching out to several of you for some feedback before that. But if you have experts and you want to make sure that we have them on our list, or you want us to think about using them, send us an email and we'll look at that.
And so as we begin to wind down, I want to make sure I make one last call to any of our folks off camera out there. Any final questions, comments, thoughts that you care to share for the good of the order? No? Going once, going twice. All right, folks, outstanding. Lori, I will look to you. Can you just one last time just recap what folks should be prepared for on our next convening, and then we will look to our tri-chairs to close us out with some thoughts on the evening's work.
Great. And so our last meeting together for task 1 is this Wednesday, March 31st. We will present to the committee 5 or 6 statements regarding the new design assumptions, and we will ask the committee to vote those up or down, and that's how we'll provide feedback to the management committee that will directly correspond to the mayor's request to revisit several strategies. And so that is Wednesday at 5:30. It will also be televised, I believe. But it should be about an hour and a half. It's very similar to the format that we used when we did our votes prior to going to council in October of 2018.
Thank you, Lori. So I will look to you, Ms. Pierce, to give us your closing thought, and then Ms. Suann.
I think it's been a rich exchange, and I won't belabor the evening, except to say I thank you for the sharing that has taken place, and it's the beginning of a lot more sharing. And I'd like to thank the design teams for giving us a landscape that we have heard a lot of positive things about, and on which we can tell the rest of the stories. So that would be my comments for this evening. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Ms. Pemberton, Suann, closing thoughts for the evening.
Thank you. I always learn something new when I listen to Ramon. So I should listen. I try to listen as often as I can, because it just adds to what we've been saying, is that there is such a rich history and layering that I don't know that anyone will ever know everything, but we're trying to learn as much, and we're always going to discover that there's something new out there that will happen. So it's an evolution. I thank everyone for participating in the conversation and adding to this incredibly rich opportunity that we all have.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Councilwoman Villagrán, last of the last words to close us out for the evening.
Thank you all so much for taking the time today. We know that you could be anywhere doing a myriad of things on your very busy schedules, but we thank you for taking the time out here and for making this such a priority for all of you and representing the your areas very well. To all of you who are also appointed by council members, I want to let you know that I am keeping council members, my council colleagues, apprised of the conversations that we are having and some of the status updates. So you all can circle back with them and check in with them, but I have been keeping them informed of what's happening here. And our tasks are going to continue and will be that robust and vibrant conversations that I'm looking forward to in task 2 with our interpretive plan discussions. And also I wanted to reiterate that we as tri-chairs heard you as wanting to be used as a valued resource. And I hope that we will utilize that, especially when we're going into the interpretive plan process. So rest assured on that. And thank you again for all of your input. And I look forward to seeing you all Wednesday.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and we will see you Wednesday at 5:30. Be well.
Bye-bye.